What is up, everyone? Bryce Stanhope here with I'm Possible Training, and this series is going to cover everything you need to know about shooting the basketball like a pro. Now, we're going to talk about some things in here that you may have not heard before, or we might even get into some topics that old school shooting coaches that used to teach back in the 70s, 60s that we're still trying to apply now that might not have as much relevancy as it used to. So as we go through this next couple of weeks and really building along the guide of what great pros are doing to shoot the basketball, make sure as you're following along with this, understand it might not feel comfortable to you right away. Anytime you make a small little tweak in hand placement, it might not feel right for the first 5 to 10 shots, but what you will understand is once you get through it and you really commit to making those small little changes, once you get 10 to 20 shots in, it's already going to start feeling a lot better. I think it's the hardest thing when it comes to shooting. It's very emotional and it's a very feel thing. So if you're a player that's used to holding the ball a certain way, but maybe it's just not as effective for you as you would like to be willing to make some changes, be willing to make some little tweaks. And I'm telling you, you will pick it up so quick as long as you commit, pull the Band-Aid off, and just work on it and rep it through. So in part one, we're going to focus on hand placement. Now, hand placement is the domino effect of shooting. For a lot of players, because of their poor hand placement, that gives them poor wrist placement, poor elbow placement, elbows flaring. A lot of that stems from the hands. So if we were going to look at the basketball, what we want to first be able to understand, looking at the majority of pros, just about 99% of them are going to find the laces every single time that they can. It's actually very rare that you watch a player catch it with no adjustments and shoot right away if they have time. What you'll typically see is a catch, a quick little hand adjustment to where they want their hands with those laces because they want that beautiful aesthetic spin on the ball. So if we're looking at the shooting hand, this is going to be the first most crucial part, because if you've ever listened to me talk about shooting before, the most important part of the shot is going to be our release, which is going to stem from where our hands started on the ball. So if you have a shooting basketball, this is what we look at, or if you have a regular basketball, you can understand and find where the center of the basketball is. You could draw a line on it. You could throw some tape on it if you wanted to. Just make sure you're really deciding where the center of that basketball is. So now we're going to have 3 main options in our shooting hand here. Now, I'm not worried about the first line and the second or the third line with this. I want to really focus on the second line, which would be our middle of our basketball. Now, number one option would be pointer finger in the center of the ball. So now we don't see this a ton with shooters, but it is an option that we do find every now and again, and that would just be finding the center of the basketball and placing the pointer finger in the middle. Now, the reason this isn't necessarily my favorite is I feel like it oftentimes gives a much weaker release. Like we're almost focusing too much on the ball just coming off the pointer by itself. So that's not always my favorite because it doesn't feel the most stable as I'm pressing out into that ball. Now, secondly, it would be split finger. Now I have my center line. Again, my pointer finger would split the left side of the middle of the basketball, and my middle finger would be on the right side. Now, my favorite thing about this hand position is it feels very strong. It feels like I have a good source of power that when I go to shoot it, I can really feel those 2 fingers driving through that true center of the basketball. And then lastly, it would be middle finger in the center. Now, we oftentimes do see this a decent amount because players are really trying to focus on the middle of the ball, so they try to put their middle of their hand, which would be that middle finger, in the center of the basketball. Again, I have no problems with that hold. It's not going to be the most common, but it does happen. Now, one thing I want to make sure you guys know that there would be more than those 3. We have all sorts of players. Maybe they have a little bit more of a hand tilt. Maybe they're a little bit more towards the outside of the basketball when you shoot. Those are just going to be the main 3 that when we look at the majority of great pro players, those are the options that they're using the most. Now, the one I want to focus on, which is by far the most, would be split finger. This is the one that we see the majority of basketball players doing. And again, I think it's because they feel they're really trying to express shooting off those 2 fingers. So it just kind of makes sense. If I'm finding the center of the basketball, split the center with my pointer and my middle. Now, if you're using a different basketball, which I would assume the majority you are, so let's say you have the Wilson Evolution, the L and the S would be the center of your basketball. Or you can do something as simple as find the logo on the ball. Chances are that logo is the middle of the ball, and see if those fingers are splitting the middle of that basketball on our setup. Now, let's take a look at the offhand here. Now, offhand's going to have 3 options here. Now, we're going to go with the first one being a little bit weaker of an offhand grip, and I'll explain why we consider it weak. Now, with my fingers only starting to go up part of the way where the ball starts to crest over, I don't really have a good solid hold of the basketball if I'm in that split finger in my shooting hand. My hand's a little low. For a lot of you old school guys, people used to heavily teach hand down on the side of the basketball, but what we have found for a lot of players, this is actually what is causing them to want to thumb the basketball when they shoot, or they want to flip that offhand and shoot with two. That's why oftentimes we want to steer clear of telling players, hey, get your hand down on the side of the basketball. I would actually start to scoot it up more to where those fingertips are up top. So weak hold would be that very first line. That's right where that ball is going to start to crest over. We could have our hand in that position. It is an option that we see players like Klay Thompson, who has a little bit lower of an offhand than some of the other players. Now, a strong hold is going to be right where we're at the peak of that top of that ball. 3 great players I can tell you to go watch who are phenomenal shooters: Steph Curry, Damian Lillard, and Kyrie Irving all hold the ball in this position amongst a vast majority of others as well. Now, that's going to be where the peak of the ball and our fingertips meet. Now, one of the things I get from a lot of players that when they see this hand positioning or they see it in post is when they see a player in this position, they're like, well, your hand's on the top, you're going to block the ball now. But that's simply not true. Obviously, what's going to happen as I begin to shoot, that hand is just going to open up, and then my right hand or my left hand, if I'm a lefty, would simply follow through the rest of the way. Then lastly, and we don't see this a lot, but we do tend to see this with players who have a little bit bigger hands, maybe an Al Horford, or if you watch Kawhi Leonard, he's had a great transition from college into being a great shooter, is that hand now being in an extended position where we're actually starting to be where the hand is starting to crest over the opposite side of the basketball. Now, not necessarily my favorite, and we don't see this a ton, but it is an option, especially for you players with bigger hands, is now that that hand is in that position, now I've got a really secure hold in that extended position where that hand might be a little too far over for most, but again, it's an option. So we would have the same process. As I got into my shot, it really doesn't matter that that hand is over the top, because it's going to simply open up anyways. Now, the most common one, again, that we see would be that strong position. Fingertips towards the top of the ball, and what's great about this is I can feel like the ball is very secured without really holding on or gripping it. And that's a lot of players' problem is when they shoot, the reason they don't have nice touch is their hands are needing to grip to secure the ball, where the majority of shooters is we want those soft hands. So again, if we were going to break this down into both hands, and I would say this is the prime position, and again, that's just my opinion, but a lot of data of looking at great players, we find the majority of them in this shooting position with their hands, is that shooting hand in a split finger hold, that offhand in a strong position at the top, and if you're doing this right, pull your palm of your offhand off, and you'll notice that your fingertips are pushing that ball and securing it right into that shooting hand. So the great thing about hand position is it can be different from everybody. We can have different positions, but most of all, it's about finding what's effective for us as a player, and chances are, if it's effective for a pro, it's going to be effective for you too. So in part 1 here, make sure this might not feel the most comfortable. If your hand position's never been near these areas before, that's what's going to be the big difference for you, is taking 5 to 10, maybe even just sit in your room and messing around with your hands a little bit. But you're going to notice that after a little while here, that hand position is going to get more and more comfortable, and you're going to notice it's going to leak more and more into you making more shots. Now, if you like this series, please do me a quick favor, like, comment, and subscribe. And I would love to see what you guys have to say below. Let's have some conversations about this. And if there's anything that you want to see us talk about in further videos on YouTube, drop those comments below. We would love to help you guys as much as we possibly can.